Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's your boy Flo. I'm over here in Baumholder, Germany. The weather is slightly humid, but relatively pleasant. I have a guest here. His name is Dr. Shadow. I am so thrilled to have him here. I've been anticipating this. I know others have, and I know a lot of people want to get to know more about him. Dr. Shadow, where are you currently located right now?
So I am in Guangdong province, China.
Okay. What's the weather like over there right now?
The weather is currently okay, but they're warning that we're gonna get hit with a typhoon again, so it
Ooh,
might start raining like in a bit.
okay.
But that's normal for this time of year. So
Yeah, I've been was it yeah, I was in a typhoon when I lived in Okinawa. Those can be pretty scary, right? Like how long do they normally last out there in that region?
um, like the actual impact of the typhoon will be over in like a couple of hours or something, but before and after the typhoon it will like rain sometimes for days.
Yeah. Oh my,
I mean, I'm
yes.
not like a meteorologist or something, but I think they have something called rain bands that is like this huge like halo of rain around the typhoon, and that can
Yes.
take, as I said, sometimes takes days for that to like dissipate completely.
E- Exactly. Exactly. Like 2 to 3 days, the power is out. It's not a fun time.
Mm.
Um, so
But
Dr.
again, this happens all the time, in this region, so we're used to it, but it's irritating.
Do you guys have infrastructure to kind of deal with it and like keep the power on, or is it kind of just like the power goes out and
I've never had a power outage, so it's not like in like maybe in Southeast Asia or whatever they have that. We do get some flooding. I feel like the drainage system here is like not adequate for the amount of water that we have,
Hmm,
which is why when it's summer, I've taken to always wearing sandals outside because they dry faster than if you wear like normal shoes.
of course. Yeah. So, Sato, tell the audience a little bit about yourself in terms of where were you born at, like your
Okay, so I am from Sweden originally, Gävleborg County. So that's where the funny accent is from. And I lived in Sweden until I was about, like, say, 22-ish. And then I moved to China. And I've been here more or less ever since. I've had two, like, gaps when I went back. But essentially, I've been in China for something like a cumulative 9 years at this point.
Okay. Do you ever miss the part of it? What part of Sweden were you born in? Do you miss it? You've been in China for about
I'm,
9 years
I'm
now.
from a city called Söderhamn. It's geographically, you could say it's in the middle part of Sweden. It's about a 3-hour drive north of Stockholm.
Okay.
But culturally, it's considered to be the so-called northern part of Sweden, like Norrland.
Okay. That makes
This
sense.
is a
Yeah.
little confusing. We typically divide Sweden culturally into the south, middle, and north, but the so-called north is actually like half the surface of the country. It's a little bit like Russia with Siberia, that is huge, but still like less developed and important than European Russia.
Okay. What would you say cultural differences between like the northern or middle part of Sweden and the south? What would you say those
This is
differences?
interesting. I mean, the north is home to only like 10% of Sweden's population, so it's way more rural and
Okay.
colder than the south. So Northerners are said to be like a little bit more introvert because I guess they don't meet as many people in their daily life and whatever, and also a little bit more like socially awkward. So not me, obviously, but like people will stand like 4 meters apart at the bus stop and whatever.
Hmm.
And also the north has a bit more like do it yourself mentality because like if your car breaks down or something, it might be like miles to get to the nearest like repair shop or whatever, so it kind of helps if you're able to do like basic repairs and stuff yourself.
Really? So let's just say I was driving in the north part of Sweden, like I was broke down. Out there in the south of the United States, people pulling over, like it doesn't even matter. Like, of course, like might be racist people, but like I would be walking on the side of the road, people pulling over and asking me, "Hey, do you need a ride?" or something like that. Does that type of stuff go on in like the northern part of Sweden, or no? People just ignore you and just keep going about their way.
I haven't personally been in this situation. I imagine eventually somebody would stop.
Yeah.
But I think generally, like Swedes don't interact with strangers as much as Americans do.
What do you think
This
that
is also
exists?
this is something I've noticed in my like interactions with other cultures, that Americans and Canadians are the most like extrovert people I know. Because so in Sweden, if you're in a diner, let's say, and it's you and one other person in the whole place, right? The culture in Sweden is that you sit as far away from the other person as you can, because you don't want to bother them. The idea is like you don't know if maybe they're reading something on their phone, or they're working, or they're thinking about something important. You don't know, right? So unless you have some kind of a business with that person, like you need to ask directions or whatever, you're not supposed to like interact with them. But in like my experience is that in the US and Canada, you will have like random people coming up and asking to sit with you, even if there are plenty of other tables available.
We still got this thing over in the US. So like if I'm like at a urinal or something and some dude uses the same urinal next to me, I'll be like, bro, what are you doing? Like I would, or if I was sitting down somewhere and some dude sat specifically right next to me, we would still sit somewhat apart. But I also see what you're talking about in terms of going way out of your way to just avoid human interaction. And that's what I'm getting when you describe northern Sweden. I think in the US, we kind of enjoy, depending upon the area, like if you're in the southern parts of the United States, for sure, like that southern hospitality, people wanting to get to know you, talk to you, and all that stuff exists out there. But like in like places like New York or like on the West Coast or anywhere, I think people enjoy their space, but they don't go way too out of their way to enjoy their space. But I see what you're talking about. And what was this, since you moved over to China, like what was the starkest difference that you noticed in terms of going from Sweden to living to somewhere like China?
There's basically just more of everything in China. Like where I grew up, we have one movie theater in the whole city. And that movie theater, maybe when I was little, it would play like one movie per night. So either you watch that one movie or you do something else, you know. Whereas in China, like within like my, let's say, commuting radius, I have probably like at least 5 movie theaters to choose from, who all play different stuff. Like each one will have multiple movies and whatnot. And this kind of diversity is the same with everything. Like you have more options for food, like more options for like all kinds of like sports and recreation and whatnot.
So one thing I want to ask you, that I imagine going from northern Sweden, the region in which you lived in, going to Hong Kong, going to China, it's a huge like night and day, completely different in terms of just having an abundance of things. Obviously, you talked to me beforehand about diversity, and it makes sense. The ethnic portions of Chinese people, there's a huge variety. So did it take a lot to wrap your head around? And like, how long did it take for you to adjust to that? Like going from someplace like Sweden over to China?
Yeah, I think something of what we talked about before, I don't know if that's what you're alluding to or not, but in China, you still get a lot of attention as a foreigner, right?
Yeah.
Because in Sweden, at this point, I think is maybe something like 20 to 25% of the population are immigrants, like either first or second generation. So in Sweden, nobody is really like surprised at seeing a non-white person in Sweden. You know, you will not get a lot like stares because of that. But in China, something like 90% of the population are Han Chinese, and then the other like 9.9% after that are like other Asian minorities, like let's say Tibetans and Manchus, Koreans, etc. So like the racially non-Asian population of China is maybe like 1 in 1,000, like 0.1% or something. So if you happen to be like in that 0.1%, you do get a lot of attention for that.
Okay. Well, did you enjoy the
for example, I believe I am like, so in my last workplace, I was pretty much like the only white person in like that whole community, which meant I was like a local celebrity somewhat.
Oh, okay.
Maybe they didn't know my name, but they know that, okay, I was that European guy who like...
They were like, yeah, I know that white guy. I know that white guy. Did you enjoy the intense? What are the pros and cons? Did you enjoy the intensity that you get, or was it like overwhelming and you rather just, because like you were telling me culturally, like you were accustomed to, hey, I stick to myself. Like if I can avoid interaction, I avoid interaction. And like now you're somewhere where you're just getting attention all the time, and there's a huge amount of more people compared to where you were just living.
I mean, there are pros and cons to that, and it depends a little like on my mood that day, I guess. Sometimes it's fun that you kind of feel like a celebrity, and I feel like you do get some like positive special treatment sometimes because you're exotic and whatnot. But it's true that people will come up to you and ask you, like, you get asked the same questions like basically every day, especially by taxi drivers for some reason. I already have like my whole script memorized for, the default taxi driver conversation, because all of them want to know the same things.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And also like parents, they want their kids to like practice speaking English to me and whatever. So if you pass a family, they will try to like nudge their like 5-year-old or whatever to go talk to me.
Okay. So like opportunities and people, depending upon circumstances, how you're feeling during the day and all that stuff, it makes sense to me the way you describe it. Do you have any goals that you're working towards right now? After you just got your PhD, that was obviously a huge accomplishment. But is there anything else that you're working towards? It doesn't just have to be professional. It could be like, are you trying to learn a new instrument? Are you trying to learn how to sing? Like, what are you up to?
Well, so professionally, I just made associate professor, which is like so maybe people who are not in academia maybe don't know that, but there's basically 3 ranks of professors. You have the assistant professor, the associate professor, and full professor, right? So now I am now the middle one. So that's pretty cool. So I feel like professionally, it will probably take a little while before I make full professor. That's probably in like 6 years or whatever, if I keep up my publications. Because that's kind of how I could. So the highest degree that you can get is a PhD, right?
Yes.
So beyond a PhD, you cannot get any higher degrees. So then when we hire professors, how do we how do we separate the applicants if everybody who's applying for the professorship has a PhD? So then what you do is usually you look at how many articles they've published and like in which journals they publish those articles, like if it's a prestigious journal or not. So that's kind of what you do other than teaching.
Okay.
But as for my goals, so I've been trying for like the past, 9 years at this point to visit all provinces in China. Like whenever I'm free, I will try to go to a province where I have not been before. So I'll try to wrap up that project at some point.
Do you have anywhere in particular that you really want to go to? Man, I really would like to see places. Do they have any landmarks? And I know I might sound the Chinese equivalent of like a weeboo right now, but do they have like landmarks of like the 3 kingdoms or anything like that? Do they have like anything like, oh, this is where this battle took place and this is where that battle took place, and you can see this? I would love to see some like, I don't know, some ruins or some Like, I don't know, monuments. Yeah.
They do, obviously, but the problem is, so we know the Greeks and Romans, they really loved like their granite and marble. So like all the Greek and Roman stuff, it's built of very sturdy material, so you can still kind of see it even 2,000 years later.
Yes.
But in ancient China, the main construction material was actually wood. So if you watch like Chinese movies and whatnot, they're set in the past, all these great palaces and whatnot, those are also made of wood, but they're painted, maybe other colors, so it's not so apparent. But that means that they're vulnerable to fire, and they're vulnerable to like rot and decay, right?
Exactly.
Which means that most of the buildings that you can actually see today are at best from the Qing dynasty, usually. So the most recent dynasty. Whereas something as far back as Three Kingdoms, like maybe you can see like the foundations of a palace or something, like a little raised like wood platform where this wooden structure used to be, but the actual like the main structure itself will not be there anymore.
Mm-hmm. So that's my personal, like one of my favorite, I guess you couldn't really call it a mythology, but it's like a romanticism of events that took place back in prehistory. That and Troy, like the Iliad and all that. I love history and just romanticism and mythologies like that. Do you have anything particular historical wise? Because I mean, I always see you in the cafe talking about like, in this date this happened, and this date that happened, and historically this. You have your tables. Do you have any specific period of China that like you're very invested in or interested into, and that like you're just highly invested in towards? Like, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, the one that I suppose I have the best, or at least like the least bad understanding of, is probably like the spring and autumn and warring states period.
Yeah.
Which is where like the kingdom manga is set, for example. That because from that period, I have pretty much read all the sources that exist, which are way fewer than you would imagine. Like there's only something like 30 titles or something. So if you read it one per week, you can kind of do that in 1 year.
Okay.
But for most of these sources, I've only read each one once, which means I can't like recite the names of like all the generals and whatever that were in the Warring States period. Same with like with the Three Kingdoms. I mean, I have read the Three Kingdoms novel, and I've seen like the 1980s TV adaptation, but I've only read the novel one time and seen the TV adaptation one time. So I can't also like recite all the 400 or whatever like named characters that are in that story.
Yeah, I remember like my introduction. I'm not gonna like I'm gonna be real about it. I think this is the case for a lot of Westerners. The way we found out about Three Kingdoms was Dynasty Warriors, and if maybe the movies to some extent as well, and the video games, the different adaptations of the mythology and the history and all that. But for me, like I always looked at Wei kind of like, oh, they're the evil people. Cao Cao, he's like the evil guy. But when you actually look into the history of it, I mean, obviously there is no, well, there definitely is evil. There definitely is human atrocities, slaughters, all types of stuff. But it wasn't as simple as Liu Bei is virtuous and Cao Cao is like the evil guy, and Wu is somewhere between the middle, and they're very family oriented. No, it wasn't really like that, huh? It was like Cao Cao had his own motivations. If anything, didn't he commit like a lot of atrocities and all that? Why do you think this? From what I read, I think
it's true. So actually, the oldest like source we have where like the main source for this period is the records of the Three Kingdoms, the Sangguozhi, which is like it's one of the so-called 24 histories, right? And the record of the Three Kingdoms is actually told from the point of view of Wei, right? Because they were the guys who ultimately won, right? So they were considered like the legitimate dynasty of the Three Kingdoms up until about, let's say, the 1100s or something. So in the 1100s, that's when you have this. There's a Reformation movement within Confucianism at that time. So we distinguish like old Confucianism and Neo-Confucianism. And the Neo-Confucians, for some reason, which I'm not entirely clear on why, because this is not really my subfield, but they thought that actually Shu is the more legitimate state because they are the continuation of the Han Dynasty. And then when like Neo-Confucianism became like the dominant strain of Confucianism, then we kind of just rewrote all the like the historical narrative that now suddenly Shu are the good guys and Wei are the bad guys.
And they make Zhuge Liang kind of like is he kind of like a poster child of Confucianism or
yes, I would say so.
Yeah. From what I noticed, like it's like even outside of like if you don't even pay attention to like entertainment, movies or video games, whatever, Zhuge Liang, like I noticed he's always kind of been used kind of like as a poster for that in particular. But yeah,
I was always interested that because shockingly, I have never played any of the Dynasty Warriors games myself. So I'm often surprised at like how familiar a lot of people are with specifically the Three Kingdoms because they played those video games.
Those games were amazing. I haven't played one since I was a kid. Well, no, I played one when I was an adult to kind of see what it was like. But it's the same exact game. But man, it's something about it. Like you're just controlling a character, and then they have you. Is this an interesting setting for real? For real, like I'm not too sure if you were particularly. You don't strike me as a type that enjoys video games.
I have played video games. You know, I just don't talk about it.
What video games have you played?
At the moment, I actually play EverQuest still. Do you know EverQuest?
Yeah, I've seen that before. That's been around for like 2 decades, right?
It has. It's been around since 1999.
Yeah, it's been around for
I played EverQuest for like 1 year, from 2002 to 2003. Then from 2003 to 2011, I played Star Wars Galaxies, which then folded in 2011. So then I went back to EverQuest, and I've been on that one like ever since.
You play RuneScape? You strike me as the kid who played RuneScape too.
I did not actually play RuneScape. I do kind of know about it.
Okay. Did you play Final Fantasy?
So I played video games in like the late 90s to early 2000s, let's say.
Okay.
So I'm familiar with like StarCraft and Warcraft 3 and like the games from kind of that era. But if you say something that came out like after 2010, maybe I don't know it.
Okay. And I have one final question. We sort of talked a little bit about your traveling and all that, but before we headed into like Naruto formulated stuff, in particular, do you have any sports that you play? Any instruments? Any art? Movies?
So to nobody's surprise, I used to do Kung Fu at one point, but I kind of dropped that during the pandemic. I should probably get back into it. So I don't get like morbidly obese or whatever.
So you're not fat. I see the picture. You're not fat. But what do you call it? Oh crap! I lost my train of thought. I was going to ask you something about the Yeah. So what were you? What belt were you? Like white belt or?
I was like at best like the second belt out of 8.
Okay. Hey man, you got to get
so
back.
Not very good, but it was fun.
I have this buddy. If you ever meet him, I want you to beat his ass. His name is Ying. So if you ever get the chance to, for sure, he's always talking shit. As a matter of fact, he was talking shit about you about like a week ago in the server. So I would really like to see you like teach him some respect because he's a very disrespectful. He's a very disrespectful.
I was actually taking Kung Fu before I could speak Chinese, believe it or not. So the causation is more that because I tried out Kung Fu when I was like 13 or 14, that was like my first exposure to Confucian culture, this kind of like the constant like respect and ritualism that you have in everything that you do.
it teaches a lot of discipline. I think one of the biggest things I respect out of it, it's would you say I got into like a small debate, and I'm not a martial artist by no means and all that, despite like my profession and all that. But Kung Fu is like literally like designed for like you to kill someone, right? Like at the end of the day, it's not designed for like.
I mean, some people will claim that, but it's not like if you just want to beat people up, you should do like MMA or Krav Maga or something like that. Whereas Kung Fu, because Kung Fu has a lot of this traditional Chinese medicine considerations in it. Like you do it like this kind of qigong exercises and that kind of thing, which maybe people who do MMA, they would say that this stuff is unscientific. Like you don't have to do with this, like this meditation component and whatnot. So there's definitely a kernel of like effectiveness to Kung Fu, but there's also a lot of stuff in it, again, that maybe people who practice martial arts that were invented more recently, they would say that maybe it's not like necessary for a martial artist to know this stuff.
Exactly. There's a lot of debate. There's even, I've been seeing like YouTube videos or YouTube shorts of like Kung Fu artists challenging MMA and all that. And people
this is Xu Xiaodong. So Xu Xiaodong he is a Chinese mixed martial artist who he's made it his mission to expose like what he calls fake Kung Fu masters.
Yeah, he's been beating people's asses, but apparently like he's gotten a lot of critique over it, and he's a very controversial individual for obvious reasons.
People call him like unpatriotic and whatever.
Yeah,
this is one of my gripes, by the way, when people have this say, you can call it maybe like science nationalism, that like people will think like, because let's say traditional Chinese medicine, because that one was invented in China, then the Chinese people should give Chinese medicine priority over Western medicine or whatever, or you're not allowed to criticize traditional Chinese medicine, or you are like anti-Chinese or something.
We have similar stuff with the United States and all that, like exceptionalism and nationalism, and it's kind of interesting how it manifests the way you describe it over in your particular country that you're residing in now.
So, for example, I mean, we know that there was a time when people thought that the sun revolved around the earth, right?
Yeah.
But then you have Copernicus, right, in Poland, who discovers that actually it's the other way around. It's the earth revolves around the sun. No,
exactly.
But the fact that Copernicus happened to be living in Poland, that's a complete accident. You know, he could have been German or Russian or Japanese or whatever, and it would still have been true that the earth revolves around the sun. So whether or not something is scientifically accurate or inaccurate is not determined by the passport of the person who makes the discovery, right?
Yes, makes sense. Okay, so I feel like that was a very good introduction. I think people got a good knowledge base about some things in particular about you. So I actually want to maneuver into talk about Naruto forums. First things first, what encouraged you to join NF? I remember you talking somewhat about it off and on throughout the years of me being in the cafe, but I never have seen you actually talk about Naruto. I never seen you talk too much about manga or anime or anything in particular. It's always about history. It's always about you're probably you're one of the most knowledge-based individuals who understands just, I don't know, geopolitics and all that, and not just geopolitics of this era, but you actually like have a lot of knowledge about like the history of certain countries in particular, out of a lot of people. So if I had just seen you posting, I would not think that you had joined in to talk about, Itachi. The reason why Itachi did this, the great Tsunade, and I cannot never see an individual like yourself joining a Naruto forum type discussion.
Okay, so I joined in 2005, I believe. So I was born in 1989. So this was when I was like 16, right? My math is terrible. So at that time, I did have some interest in like manga and anime, and I kind of hung out with people who were interested in that. So so I think what happened. So again, this is a long time ago, so I'm trying to remember exactly the chain of events here. But so I've like a bunch of my buddies were into Naruto, so I was kind of into that as well together with them. And I was wondering, like, okay, where do I find, like, I think it was the Naruto manga at that time, because I'd seen the anime, like, up to, this was probably when we were in the big filler hell or something. It's just...
that's around the same time I joined, like, when it was in filler hell, from the part 2 or whatever.
Yeah. I'll have to double check if it's the right... I think it was the filler hell anyway. So I wanted to get into the manga. And I asked my buddies, okay, where can I find the manga? And they said, okay, you can find it on this place called narutofan.com. So I was originally on the main Naruto fan website, which still existed at that point. Maybe our younger viewers do not remember that Naruto forums was originally like an adjunct to this other site.
OG.
Yes, so from the main site, I guess I kind of stumbled into the forums somehow. And I guess initially I must have posted about the manga or something. I guess we can check, maybe MBXX has deleted all the history from back then or something. But anyway, so I found the cafe somehow, and then that became my thing, sort of, because that was like it was a reasonably active sort of place for me to talk about whatever was on my mind at that time.
Yeah, what year was this? Like when you saw the cafe, like estimated time?
I mean, it must have been soon after, but I think maybe this was in like 2006 or something. I think Mega Harrison was still the moderator at that time. Or maybe it was slightly before. Because I think Mega Harrison was the moderator for like 6 years or something. Or no, sorry. So there
was someone before him.
There was 2011 to 2016 or something. So it must have been somebody else first.
Yeah, man. Like in the cafe, I remember joining, and just saw everybody posting in there. I was like, I don't know what the fuck they're talking about. Like I literally, it kind of just felt, intimidating someone to even post in there, because it felt like everyone, like the regulars, are part of the cafe. I'm talking around the same time, like you had noticed it too, around 2000. I joined around 2007, 2008. But I remember going to it early and just being like, man, I cannot, like, these people are way out of my league. I'm just like,
I think a lot of people, especially with our posters from the US, I think a lot of people joined around the 2008 presidential election, because there was this huge like Obama wave.
Yeah. That was a lot of people. Actually, I mean, we can talk, maybe that might coincide with some of our discussion and all that, but for sure, I think one of the two biggest eras that got people more invested into 3 different eras was Obama, the election of Trump, and somewhat the Bernie side and all that. But obviously, that doesn't really coincide. I don't think Bernie got people joining Naruto forums or posting the cafe. But those 2 eras, I think they heavily Obama and Trump in particular, it caused so much activity within the cafe.
Indeed.
Yeah.
The 2016 election was the hardest time to be a moderator.
Oh my God.
Yes, that was like being in World War I or something.
Oh my God. So, like, I remember the cafe. I talked with a few people before in the interviews about the cafe. It was like the Wild West. You had people literally wearing like anime sets of like anime girls wearing like Nazi clothing and all this stuff. You had just people just like cussing each other out, like in the worst type of manners. I remember 1 month in particular, Mega Harrison, he went to Israel, or he was doing some stuff. I'm not going to go into detail about it, but it was obvious. There was some stuff that happened, but he was gone. And like the cafe just fell apart. You remember, because I remember you were posting in there, the cafe combo and all that. You remember like just all the debates, Ham Banana, you had Bacon Bitch, you had Seto Kiba, you had Normality, you had me in there, you had just Ken, you had so many people just arguing back. I remember there was like 1 week, I'm not shitting you this, man. There was 1 week in particular, it was just nonstop, just going for each other's throats. It was like we were using that thread to kind of just like vent off work frustrations or life frustrations and just rip on the other person.
Yeah. So, So as you're alluding to, when we had joined, let's say, if it was about the same time, so it was a different time back then. Like the cafe was much less regulated, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I survived in that kind of climate.
You survived, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so you've noticed that I am not a person who is like easily offended or easily rattled or whatever. So for me personally, it was like not that bad to live in that kind of atmosphere. And I also kind of just accepted that I guess this is the like normal state of this section. So when I became some people will remember this, when I became the moderator initially, my first instinct was like, okay, I'll just keep it the way that Mega Harrison did it, which was basically you have no moderation at all, almost.
That's not what people want to do.
If a person says something who is like offensive or bad taste or whatever, it's better that the other people in the thread can call them out on it, rather than that the moderator will like artificially interrupt the conversation. So that was my original kind of idea. But then based on feedback, over like the first 1 or 2 years, like I have since tried to like make it more regulated. And actually, especially maybe since I got Island as my co-moderator, it's also become like a bit more orderly. Because I feel Island, even though I am in terms of years, I am the senior moderator, but honestly, I would say Island is more active. Like he makes it a bigger part of his life to like manage the section, whereas I'm like, I've got other stuff going on in real life, right?
Yeah. And I guess the cafe, and this is what I think what was hard for people to kind of understand, because the cafe went from the Wild West, anything goes for the most part. You couldn't just go around calling people to some extent it was moderated. Things went too far. I remember Mega Harrison, if he got way too pissed off, he would just start mass banning people. When he came back from that 1 month break that he wasn't inside the section, it was very terrible. Like it was just people just going at each other's throat. He came back and just started banning people left and right. So it was an inconsistent with the moderation and everything. That's what I did notice. But I don't think you could really take a section like the cafe and be too consistent with the modding. It's very difficult. Like you were saying, it's one of the toughest sections to moderate because, like you said, sometimes it's like, hey, let the crowd take care of this individual and all that. But then you also have another user like, well, why are the mods letting this guy bully this guy? And see, that's what makes it so screwed up. But then you also have the guy who may have said some screwed up stuff about Ukrainians or something like that, or they should all die.
This is one of the headaches of moderators, that you have all these amateur lawyers. If you like penalize them for something, maybe it's not even a ban, like maybe you just lock them out of that thread or something, then they will find they will find some case from like 5 years ago where they say, well, look, here was a similar situation and you didn't do it the same way.
I know exactly what you're kind of talking about. I've been guilty of doing
but so number one, so I mean, ultimately this is an anime forum which is modded by volunteers, Like none of us get paid to moderate you guys, and also none of us, to my knowledge, has like a law degree. So the forum rules are not written by somebody with like legal training, right? And then the people who enforce them also do not have they haven't gone to like Harvard Law School or whatever. So you have to expect that sometimes there is inconsistency. I mean, when it comes to applying like the letter of the rules. But hopefully there's a consistency in enforcing the spirit of the rules, at least. Like you're not allowed to be like mean to other people, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been, I can't remember when it started, but after a while, I just became a very crass like individual. I've just been very belligerent with people that I just, I find their views deplorable and all that. And I would never scratch my head way too much if I were to get banned or anything like that at this point. Back then, I mean, I was a baby crying about like mod abuse and all that. But if I'm calling someone an asshole or a fuckface and all that, and I got banned or something, I'm not gonna like completely. If the person wasn't insulting me back, for the most part, I'm not gonna be like too shocked about it. But the way you're telling me about like how you moderate the section and everything, it's just extremely difficult. And obviously you don't have to talk about this way too much, but in terms of an individual like JFF, you guys implement proceedings and you guys want to maneuver the section in a certain type of manner, but then he comes in and just starts dick waving everywhere. So it kind of just
so people will know that we have not just the cafe moderators, but like the moderation team generally has occasionally conflicts with JFF, formerly MBXX, who is the guy who took over NF after Tasmo disappeared. Right? So Tasmo is the founder of our forums, but he has not logged in since 2016. We have tried asking MBXX where he is or what happened to him, but MBXX will not explain. So it's a mystery.
That's just wild. Anyway, I don't mean to cut you off right there, but that's just extremely wild to me. Like, I just don't understand. Like, I did not know the moderators operated. I thought you guys were a lot more knowledgeable. I thought you guys knew the works of what was happening. Maybe not the personal lives of other people, but to the extent of like the original founder being gone and no one knowing what happened to him or her, and then MBX takes over. I mean, I was talking with another user about this maybe about a month ago. It wouldn't be surprising to me one day if I just logged on and NF was just gone, because there's not really a lot of good communication. You have MBX like asking for a whole bunch of donations. Not he's asking for a whole bunch of donations, but he's asking for a specific amount of donations per month. Tasmo is gone. There's an inconsistency with the rules, and almost to the extent of MBX thinks that like if he bans someone, like the EU SWAT team is gonna like break down his apartment door and stuff like that. Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of weird angles to it that aren't really left explained, and like it makes people want answers, if that makes sense, you know?
So there's several tiers of moderators, right? Not everybody seems to always understand that because they ask me to do things that I actually can't. But so you have the section moderators, which is me, Island, Nemesis, etc. Then you have the super moderators, and above them the administrators, right? Then above the administrators is MBXX. And theoretically, above MBXX is Tasmo. But again, we have not seen Tasmo in now almost a decade. So he's like this mythical figure at this point. It's like you're waiting for Jesus to come back on the last days or something.
Yeah.
But where I was getting to is that I would guess there's like different levels of like security clearance and whatnot. So maybe like Resnor and Renoa and those people, maybe they know what happened to Tasmo, but they're not telling me. But at least MBXX is not telling me, and not telling the other people that I know to have asked.
Yeah, and I remember someone mentioned like they spoke German. They tried speaking German to MBX, and like they didn't really understand what he was saying. So there's just a lot of
Indeed, yeah. So again, so none of us, or at least very few, are like trained lawyers,
yeah.
but the other moderators, they have some kind of notion that, okay, there is such a thing as rules, and we should try to consistently enforce the rules, at least in principle. But MBXX, he does not seem to have this notion of consistency. It's just he just does whatever he feels like on that day with no consultation. And this is inconvenient when the person who has this kind of personality is also like the dictator of the forum, essentially.
Yeah, and I don't understand like why he has a fixation. I mentioned this maybe like 5 times. I don't know why he in particular he wants to moderate the cafe. Sometimes it looks like he's just being spiteful about it, but I don't know the way his mind works. I don't know what his goals are, what he wants to do. But it seems out of all the sections, like to kind of like maneuver it or to like put this tight leash on it. I don't think he's moderating the wrong types of things. Like I just been mentioning, like we have racist users in the cafe. We have people who call for like deaf Ukrainians and stuff like that. Like racism, homophobia, or calling for human atrocities, that's probably what the biggest thing you should be banning people from the cafe for. Everything else, he seems to focus on stuff that doesn't really matter. And I don't think that like trying to...
He's very concerned with like Google search results and whatever, which is why we got this this auto censorship of banned words, which you will have noticed. So
that's what I figured, yeah.
And
so oh, go ahead. Sorry.
But you have to understand his mentality. Like, if he makes the forum so that you cannot write the N-word, for example, if you do that, it gets replaced with something else. That is not because MBXX thinks that saying the N-word is bad in principle. It is because he thinks if that shows up in our Google search results, then we will appear lower in the search result list or something.
Yeah, so
it's some kind of reasoning like so. So he's banned a bunch of words that he thinks will get us flagged as some sort of PG-13 or R-rated site that should not be shown to, I don't know, the target audience of Naruto or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, not to beat a dead horse, but like I know for a fact, if the users are irritated, the moderation team is definitely irritated. You guys have tried to reach out to him, but he there's this very difficult manners of trying to appeal to him, and he's going to do what he does. Maybe sometimes if he sees a lot of people complaining, he might relent, but it seems to be falling on deaf ears often. I want to ask you, are you on strike right now in the cafe? Because I remember you've been...
I am not currently on strike. I have been on strike like 2 times before, though.
No, I was just wondering because I remember some people were like tagging you to stuff, like, and it was just like, there's no action being done. Now, like, I'm not saying you don't do shit, but I'm just saying, like, I remember you mentioned you were on strike, and I was like, I wonder if he's still on strike, because, like, there was no word about it that was brought up or anything. Like,
no, I'm not on strike. I am, like, in part because of MBXX, I am possibly less, like, motivated to do my job, because my experience is that he can just come and undo whatever I did.
Yeah. Do you
It's the same. I mean, we've had cases where we've banned people, and then MBXX comes and unbans them because they complain to him or whatever. Like, maybe I'm not gonna name names, but you can probably imagine like who I'm referring to.
I've seen the types. I mean, I know like the exact specific, but I've seen the types. Like, what do you call it? With people who try to raid. I mean, I'm just gonna say the OBD. They'll try to like raid the cafe or something. And then I know I viewed even when I had my hiatus when I left back around 2019, I think. Yeah, I left around 2019. I would still view the forum off and on from now. But I remember just people, just like OBDers, like raiding every now and then and stuff like that, even when I was on. And I would hear about them complaining to the moderation team and all that stuff. And I was like, you can't just like try to raid a section, like try to spew all these like far right talking points and then like make fun of people, and then when you get banned, like I seen the types that you're talking about. Yeah. What made you want to become a mod? Because to me, it seems very thankless. Maybe people know of you and all that, and maybe you get some type of satisfaction in improving.
Well, so you know, becoming a moderator is kind of like joining the Men in Black. You know that it's not a job that.
Sorry,
it's not a job that you actually apply for. It's just that, like, you wake up in the middle of the night and then on your couch is sitting, you know, a guy from the Men in Black who says, "Hello, do you want to be a secret agent?" It's almost like that.
Yeah.
I
remember everyone was pissed off, and it kind of happened suddenly. Mega Harrison, he got his racist tirade. And he had his fall from grace. It was on display for us for like maybe 5 to 6 months. And I remember people were like, "Hey, I want Mr. Sato at the time, and I want Bacon Bits." Those were like the two people that everyone was just like, not everyone, but like a good amount of people were like, "Hey, they should be mods. They should be mods." And I was just thinking, I was like, does Mr. Sato want to become a mod? Like, how did that even work? What happened with that?
Yeah, so basically they approached me, asked if I wanted to be a mod, and I figured, well, I basically post in this section every day anyway, so it wouldn't hurt if I had like mod powers, because then if I see something I think is not right, I can just deal with it myself, like without having to like ask somebody else to do it. I guess that was essentially, I was approached by, who was the guy with the avatar who was a stick figure? I've forgotten his name.
Wasn't his name like Disorder or this? I know.
Yeah, something like that.
With the guy with the like, and it was like a stick figure, but it was making like a mocking type of gesture, right? With the hands.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this would have been in, I think, 2016, right? It was shortly after I started doing my PhD in Hong Kong. So I was thrust into being a moderator both when I was just settling into my let's call it my job, and also shortly before the 2016 presidential election, right? So that was a lovely time to like learn how everything worked. I still don't know how everything works.
Okay. Do you feel content with your work as a mod? Like, do you feel like, do you feel as though you've done a good job as a moderator? Like, all things considered, like humanly possible, what you were asked to do, what you have going on in your life, and just everything. Do you feel like you've done a decent job?
I hope so.
Okay.
I mean,
what do you want people to understand about your job? That you're like, hey, like, fuck off. Like, well, what's one thing, like, you had to give the middle finger to, like, your critics and all that, like, that you feel like people come at you for, but you're like, man, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, I put in one. Yeah. What is it?
I guess people should understand that it's not my job to protect them from opinions they don't want to hear.
Okay.
Because that's because I mean, most maybe complaints that people make are valid, or at least I hope valid in my understanding. But you do get people complaining to the mods about things where it's like either personal animosities with somebody, or just that somebody let's say that somebody happened to insult the country that you are a citizen of or whatever, and you get mad about that. But we can't have a rule where we say you're not allowed to insult the country of anybody who is in the section, because then you could not discuss like geopolitics in that way. If you're not, like, suppose we had one user who was from North Korea, would we then not be allowed to say bad things about North Korea? That would be weird, right?
It would be weird, and what makes it I think that's just a glaring hypocrisy with some users and all that with their nationalism. And I'm surprised about it in terms of recently, because I'm just like, I'm not going to name names, but it's like this person in particular, I know for a fact they would call out people of a specific country, like Russians, for example, for what's going on in Ukraine, or Americans, depending upon like what our government is doing and the way an election turns out and say, oh, well, Americans must be okay with something like this. And but when it's their particular country, they have like all like, yeah, I know who you're talking about. Well, I don't know who you're talking about. I think I know what you're talking about though. And
yes, but it depends on how it's phrased, right? Because I don't know if it says in the current version of the rules, but at least it said in a previous version of the rules that in principle, you can't attack people for things they don't have any control over. Yeah. Like a person cannot they can't control like which country they're from, what race they are, which gender they are, etc. So these things should be. This is what's the right word? It's like bad taste to go after somebody because they have some kind of like, I don't know, disability or whatever that they can't control. But when it is things that you can control, then I think it's fair game. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
But with countries, there's a distinction there. Like, so let's say a person cannot control if they are a citizen of the United States or not, for example. So you should not be attacking people only for being Americans. However, since if you live in America, you have your First Amendment, like freedom of speech, right? So if you did, as an American, you can disagree with, for example, the Iraq War. Like there's no punishment for disagreeing with the Iraq War. So if you support the invasion of Iraq, even though you have the option of not supporting the invasion of Iraq, then that is something that people could call you out for, I think. I don't think that's overstepping.
Right. But one thing I did notice that was very intentional, certain individuals that they're very, I'm just going to say it, they try to find like with the Ukraine and Russia conflict, they just, how do I put this? I'm not trying to like sugarcoat anything, but I just don't want to say anything that's way too unfair. I don't think they're very transparent about their viewpoints regarding Russia and Ukraine. What I mean that by is like how do I say this? The stuff that they call for in particular with negotiations in Russia and Ukraine and all that. I'm not going to say any type of negotiation. Oh, that means you're just pro-Russia invading Ukraine. No, because that's definitely not the case. But I also feel as though that they try to find a manner to let me backpedal out of this. But I will say this: I think people, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're being banned now if they show any type of support for Russia invading Ukraine. Correct? Like if they were to flat out say, yeah, Russia deserves to invade Ukraine, would they?
Yes, that is the consensus at the moment.
Okay. That's
which I think it's not just us doing it. Basically, like in the UN General Assembly when they voted about like sanctions on Russia or whatever, I think it was like 5 countries or something that voted against something.
Yeah.
It was like, of course, Russia itself. Then it was like North Korea, Syria, Venezuela, and Cuba or something who did not condemn the invasion. So I think we're on pretty solid ground when we say that the invasion of Ukraine is not all right.
But we also have individuals within the cafe. They're basically discriminatory on different ethnic groups, LGBTQ, and all that, and it's almost to a point of, and I think 99.5% of the section, I think everyone knows for the most part, hey, I'm not gonna talk like that. They might talk a certain type of way about people from a particular country and the ideologies, the mindsets people within that specific country could have. But for the most part, people understand, hey, I'm not gonna be a racist bigot, or I'm not gonna be transphobic and all that. But we also have our trolls within the section. So my question is, like, how do you balance in terms of, okay, we're gonna ban people over if you're saying that Russia deserves to invade Ukraine because, hey, that's fucked up towards Ukraine. That's fucked up towards Ukrainians. You can't call for genocide against Ukraine, but you also have some people that are like kind of parading around and very gleeful about like discriminatory practices being practiced against like particular ethnic groups or LGBTQ and all that.
Yeah. So one aspect with this is that so section moderators cannot actually ban people ourselves. We have to apply to the higher ups that they ban people for us, which means that whatever this person said or did, it should be, as you would say, something that holds up in court. You know, like even a person who is from outside the section should be able to look at this and say, okay, this is something that violates the rules. Sometimes it's not obvious enough that it's a rules violation that you can do that. Then there are also just oversight